Hi, everybody. Welcome to the session today. I am Jonathan Sander, Field CTO at Astrix, and I'm joined by Harsh Patel. Harsh, would you mind giving a little intro of yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to meet you, Jonathan. My name is Harsh Patel. I am the enterprise applications and I am engineering manager here at HubSpot. Been with the company a little under 2 years now. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So today's session is going to be about securing NHI in the era of agentic AI, which is the era in which we find ourselves. For those of you who probably already understood this, but Harsh and HubSpot are a customer of Asterix, and we're going to be talking to them about how they got to where they are in their journey. So obviously, if we look at the scale of non-human identity, we are entering the era where AI is going to be all the things. But before we really get to that, um, I want to talk to you, Harsh, about why you wanted to do NHI now, right? Because obviously you're on the same journey as the rest of us. What made this a priority for HubSpot today? And did you have a gap that you identified? Was there some incident or something? Help us understand.
Yeah, great question. So non-human identities became a priority for HubSpot because as our digital environment grew more complex, it became clear that these automated accounts like service accounts, APIs, and bots were largely operated outside of like the traditional security process. So while we had robust checks for human accounts, NHIs like they often flew under the radar. There wasn't the same scrutiny or ownership or visibility, and we realize that these digital workers can quietly accumulate powerful privileges and remain active longer than necessary, which obviously poses a risk in security. So, recognizing that, we made it a priority to bring in NHIs under better governance and monitoring that we do with human users. And so we could close this hidden gap before they actually turn into major problems.
So I'll interpret that to mean you didn't actually have a specific problem, but you identified the gap because you compared your human program to your non-human program and found the non-human program lacking. Is that
Yeah,
a fair way to put it?
absolutely.
All right, excellent. And I think that begs the question here. What are the strategic goals and priorities that HubSpot set out for themselves in order to build this program, right? So, what I'm really after here are the top objectives when you were looking to build out your NHI security program, governance, risk reduction, compliance, other things. And the reason I'm asking, just to give you some framing, I talk to a lot of people who are trying to build these programs and they're seeking how to prioritize these things for themselves. So I'd love them to learn from you. You've already done the work. So help us out.
Yeah, great question, Jonathan. Our top objectives were primarily around visibility and wanting to ensure that we had more least privilege. Our primary goal was to make sure we inventory existing NHIs, reduce excessive permissions, and automate the discovery of new ones. So, making it easy so that any new identities get reviewed for appropriate access from day one. And stale NHIs that just haven't been used within the last 90 days automatically have permissions and privileges revoked.
Those are some very good priorities to have. So I think, again, right, I'm going to use the classic interviewer tactic here and say, I'm going to take a step back, right? And you and I have been using this term NHI, non-human identity, but I'm going to ask you to help people define that term. In other words, help define the actual problem, right? What kinds of NHIs were you most concerned with? What do they look like, right? You mentioned things like service accounts, but there's also API keys, secret tokens. What was your definition, and what were the kind of impacts you were seeing from those items? Help us understand.
Yeah, great question, Jonathan. So, really, all of those presented some level of risk: service accounts, API keys, secrets, OAuth tokens. But the biggest concern was with long lived service accounts and hard to trace APIs. Service accounts often accumulate more permissions over time, and API keys can be easily misplaced or
embedded in code, which are big issues in my opinion. And OAuth tokens pose a silent risk because their scope and life cycle just always isn't clear, and sometimes they're shared between teams inadvertently.
And did you see instances of all of the above? Is that, essentially why you were drawn into this problem? You were observing that happening in your real world?
Yeah, so before we had a proper program in place for managing NHIs, our environment did get pretty messy pretty fast. Service accounts and APIs would pick up more and more access over time. And when people left or projects ended, these old accounts and credentials were often forgotten. That meant that there was no easy way to say, there was no easy way to tell which ones were still needed and what they could do. The results of this meant a lot of unorganized, overprivileged accounts, ones that were high risk and had domain wide delegation, making it really hard to keep things safe and organized. But putting a NHI program into place helps get a lot of this risk under control, and it helps reduce a lot of unhidden risk.
Gotcha. I'm going to go slightly off script here and just ask you to comment in a little more detail on one of the things you just said, right? The accumulation of privilege, right? This is interesting because when I talk to a lot of folks, what they observe is that these non-human identities actually end up getting reused, right? I'll throw a new visual up for people. And the idea is that that reuse happens because people have access to these things, and since they used it in one case and they knew it gave them what the access they need, they use it in another case, and that ends up meaning that, they have now got two things using the one count, and then if one circumstance needs more access that the other doesn't, the access is granted to this reused identity, this reused asset, and then therefore both of them have elevated access. Were you observing exactly that sort of scenario, right?
Yeah, so we did see some use cases where service accounts and elevated accesses were being shared amongst multiple applications, which definitely pose a much higher risk in our opinion because let's say if that specific service account gets breached, it just ends up being higher risk. And typically, best practice is to separate those two environments and making sure both environments are being used in different manners and have different privileges attached to them. So yeah, that's a great risk you called out.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a design security, right? The secure by design, I should say. What I was trying to reverse that in my head. A secure by design principle, right? To make sure that you have all of these things, and it's good auditing, right? Because that way you can trace one distinct set of access versus another distinct set of access, right? You don't have to have everything jumbled together. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. While we're here, right? Um, are there any specific things you would call out about the use cases that you were looking at, right? So you called out several different things here, right? But if we're thinking about sort of the use cases, the pain points that were driving this, right? Was there a specific incident, not an incident, that's a bad word to choose. Was there a specific instance of this problem that made you, was it the straw that broke the camel's back, as they say, and said, okay, now we really have to, think about this?
Yeah, so good question. Knock on wood, we didn't actually have any incidents that involved NHIs, but it definitely could have happened to us. We did find examples of unused credentials with broad access just sitting there as low-hanging fruit for attackers. That's kind of why a tool like Astrix helped us be more proactive than reactive, so we could address these exposures before they turned into problems.
Gotcha. And were there any systems that you felt were more exposed than other systems? And again, I'm not, you don't have to call out your architecture here, right? I'm not, you don't have to reveal anything that's like NDA like, but I guess maybe what I'm really asking is, was this more prevalent in the cloud? Was this more prevalent in your on-prem systems? Obviously, HubSpot, maybe not too much on-prem, but your private data center type stuff. Was there specific areas that were hotspots for you?
Yeah, for us, yeah, as you mentioned, we typically shy away from using on-prem and prefer to be on the cloud. A lot of our SaaS vendors are actually on the cloud. And so, right, as you mentioned, having that clear visibility over the SaaS environment and just being able to see like, okay, where are all the service accounts, who has access to what, which service accounts are sitting stale. That was just an area that we just didn't have a whole lot of exposure into. So something like Astrix really gave us like a single pane of glass to be able to visibly see all of this and again proactively react to what things can be tuned down versus being in a situation where these attackers have had access to these accounts, then we're in a different situation there.
I like that harsh. Proactively react. But it does actually capture the reality, right? Because you have to
Yeah.
go look for these problems to react to so that you can beat the bad guys to the potential issues that they might exploit, right? So
Yeah.
sounds like a contradiction in terms, but I think you've actually captured it just the right way there. So it is 2025, which means we, of course, now have to talk about artificial intelligence. AI is the thing everyone is talking about, and what's interesting to me, right? And I know Harsh, we've talked about this several times. So, but for the benefit of the audience, I just like to point out that there's so many areas of technology that are basically running as fast as they can to do AI stuff, right? Um, the realm of non-human identity is not one of those areas. It's actually the opposite, right? It's the one area where it is, in fact, the AI stuff that ran to non-human identity. Because in order for these AIs to essentially become agentic, to have the autonomy, right? Um, they needed to have access to real systems and data. And because they needed that access, they ended up on the doorstep of NHIs, right? That's how they're making that happen, right? That's my soapbox. That's my that's the thing. But now I'm going to ask you some questions, right? As we look at these agentic systems, right? Let's talk about the AI angle to all of this, right? As you, I'm assuming, because you're a modern architecture, that you're also seeing both AI and agentic systems driven by AI. As you're seeing adoption grow there, how do you see that impacting the world of NHI for you?
Yeah, good question. So NHIs are rapidly revolving from traditional service accounts to more AI agents. So the problem within this space that we're hoping to leverage Asterix for would be the issue around users inheriting more permissions through AI agents. For example, let's say this AI agent has access to write Confluence Cloud wikis, but I myself as a user don't. I could inevitably just leverage the AI agent to do the task that I was unauthorized to do. So we see that becoming a much bigger problem, especially in the AI space, and as NHIs kind of continue to evolve.
Just so we can level set for the people listening, how much like adoption are you actually seeing of AI, of agents in your world, and how much is that actually touching these identity assets?
Yeah, good question. We're seeing a lot of adoption. So HubSpot is an AI first company. We have chatbots, automation scripts, machine learning pipelines, and AI agents that have all sorts of different permissions and use cases.
Yeah, I mean, actually, HubSpot is sort of famously AI first. Anyone who doesn't know what that means is free to ask your favorite search-enabled LLM, and I'm sure it will explain in great detail. So, it was sort of a Trojan horse question there. I knew that you had that kind of adoption. Um, if you were giving advice to someone in your type of role about how best to be prepared for how these AI agents are going to impact their identity programs, what sort of advice would you be giving them?
Yeah, so first, I think organizations need to expand their mindset. Don't just treat AI agents like typical service accounts, like establish guardrails so that every AI or automation identity is tracked, has a defined owner, and is subject to the same level of review as like a human account would. So invest in tools that offer this real-time visibility and have more behavioral analytics behind the scenes. I think the traditional way of having like static entitlement reviews just simply won't catch everything for AI specifically. And all of the above, I think fostering like good collaboration between teams, security, engineering, product, and all the other orgs so that everyone understands the risk with these AI tools and shares responsibility for managing them is the approach that I would take here.
Got it. Yeah. No, and I hear that. And it's interesting, you call out the ownership aspect of that, and that is definitely something I would underline and echo because that's a critical component for most of the customers from Astrix, and I'm sure for everybody who's trying to run these programs right now. Last question for you here. Um, Another sort of how would you advise your fellow identity professionals, but more focused on the budget side, right? Because it's interesting. Non-human identities are not always well defined in a lot of different ways, and one of those is their organizational ownership, right? Not just individual ownership, and so it can make budgeting challenging, right? It can make finding the place where the business value plugs into the budgeting cycle. What can you tell us about how you were able to do that at HubSpot? And maybe again, in the form of, how would you advise people to get the internal buy-in, the alignment for these types of programs?
Yeah, definitely. So getting the budget and final approval was a little difficult. Before I really got my hands in Asterix, I had a few coworkers POCing the tool for a while. We focused on making a strong business use case, mapping risk to known industry incidents, and demonstrating through the proof of concept that like the visibility and the reduction in attack surface could be achieved with the tool. It was a little over 6 months, and then finally, towards the end of the year, we were able to showcase our findings to our CISO and get approval to purchase the tool. Now, what helped us get internal buy in from security leadership? I think the best thing we did was partner with other teams and really ask them, like, okay, what are their problems or challenges, especially within the NHI space? And then we were able to frame NHI security as like a program that would also benefit them. So it wasn't just like one team or one organization was benefiting it, but we were able to show more wins throughout the org by using one tool.
Excellent. And I mean, it's interesting, right? It's right here in the diagram. You can see there's just so much that touches these non-human identities, right? So it makes perfect sense they'd have to pull in a lot of different teams in order to make that happen. What one last sort of sub question to that: did AI play a role at all? Was there, like, when you were budgeting, was some of that sweet AI cash flowing toward this project?
Yeah, we did get a little bit of AI cache for the project as we quickly realized that these AI agents can go off and do a lot more than we had anticipated. Realizing that we need to scope it down and understanding what it had access to really did become a high priority and a good selling point when it came to budgeting for the tool.
All right. Super cool. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of our time together. Sadly, Harsh, we could probably do this all day, Captain America style. I could do this all day. But before I let the audience go, I'll just throw up a couple of call to actions, right? So if you've got a lot more questions about this agentic AI security stuff, we've got some great materials, some of it featuring our use case with our friends at HubSpot. Um, Also, if you're looking for a more targeted read, we have a What is MCP, Model Context Protocol, from our friends at Anthropic, and how that also intersects the world of NHI. And if you're just looking for a more hardcore security type read, we can tell you how attackers are exploiting NHIs in the real world. And some of that pulls in stuff from our friends at CSA as well. Harsh? thank you so much for your time today. I know I'm taking you away from valuable work to talk to me, which is definitely not valuable. So I appreciate your time and all the effort you put into preparing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks for having me on here. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, no problem. To everybody out in the world watching, we appreciate your patronage and we hope this was valuable for you. Take it easy.